Alright, so today we are going to talk about the Constitution and how it came to replace the Articles of Confederation. So to start us off, in 1787, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia took place. There were 55 American leaders in attendance, and those leaders chose Washington, George Washington, our very first president, to lead the convention. First and foremost, they wanted to adjust the Articles. So going into this meeting, the goal was not to replace the Articles, it was just to fix some of the issues that had came up. However, they realized there are way too many changes that need to be made, and instead decide to make a brand new document. And obviously this leads to much debate because different states have completely different ideas about what the government should look like in the United States. What we will see in the Constitution is there are a lot of Enlightenment ideas that end up being included in the document. So some of those, we'll talk about that in a great deal, but just to spat off a few, separation of powers and checks and balances for Montesquieu is a big one. So again, just the idea that we have the three branches of government, judicial, legislative, and executive. Freedom of religion, which is one of our amendments, and that comes from Voltaire. And then separation of church and state. This is also included in our Constitution, and it comes from Voltaire, Jefferson, and Locke. All right, so when deciding how this Constitution would be laid out, again, there was a lot of debate, and there were two different plans that kind of came about. So the first was the New Jersey plan. This was the small state plan, primarily because many small states supported it. With the New Jersey plan, each state would get one vote in Congress, so it was all about equal representation, and smaller states were really concerned that the larger states would get more representation than they would, and so they thought, let's advocate for equality, let's advocate for one vote per state. They were much more state-friendly, separate needs. They also wanted one large Congress with less power, so they wanted a unicameral, which means one, legislative branch. With the Virginia plan, this was the large state plan, again, primarily because the large states, or larger states, were in support of this plan. They wanted states to get votes based on population, ideally because they were larger, and this would mean that they would get more of a say in the government. They also believed in a strong central federal government, and they wanted various branches, including national courts, and they believed in a bicameral Congress, which would just mean a two-house Congress with a House of Representatives and a Senate, which is ultimately what we end up doing. So this next picture here will kind of show how we came to a compromise. So we've got the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan listed there, and as you can see, the Great Compromise is the ultimate decision that was made and what is laid out in the Constitution. So we decided to go with a bicameral legislative branch with a Senate and a House of Representatives. The Senate would get equal representation, so there would be two Senate members from each state in the legislative branch. And then the House of Representatives would be based on representation according to the state population. Okay, so once those decisions were made, it was not over. There were still some other issues that needed to be debated. One of those being the Three-Fifths Compromise. So the southern states wanted slaves to count for representation, but not for taxes. Ideally here, southern states wanted slaves to be considered in that population count. This way they would get more representatives in the House of Reps, and again, more power in the government. But of course, they did not want them included in the population when it came to paying taxes. And on the next slide here, we'll talk about what was the decision made. Obviously, the North saw this as very unfair. Some other ideas were the executive and judicial branches. So again, under the Articles, we only had a legislative branch, so there was definitely the idea of adding 2 other branches, the executive, which would be the president, and they would enforce the laws, and the judicial branch, which would be the Supreme Court, circuit of courts. And again, with our Great Compromise, we decided to go with a bicameral, so that would be a Senate and a House, 2 Senate members from each state, and then House of Reps based on population. All right, so this image here shows the 3/5 compromise. Basically, the northern and southern states ended up compromising by agreeing to count every 5 slaves as 3 persons for both representation and taxation. So this was essentially the agreement made.